The sun bled red across the dusty street of Silver Creek, casting long shadows as Ruby Lane's tears splattered onto the marriage papers shaking in her hands. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It was 1875, and at just 21, she never dreamed her own father would gamble away her freedom for a stack of worthless mining claims and a promise to wipe clean his debts. "You can't make me marry him, Pa." Ruby's voice cracked her honey-blonde hair, falling loose around her face as she faced her father inside their weather-worn house on the edge of town. "I've barely spoken 2 words to Grant Pike. He's 30 years older than me, and everyone knows how cruel he is." Once a proud man, Eli Lane kept his gaze on the floor whiskey, and bad luck hollowing him out. "It's done, Ruby. The papers are signed. You'll be Mrs. Pike come Sunday." "Why, Pa? How could you?" Her chest heaved as the tears kept coming. "His money will save us both. The ranch is gone. The debts are piling high, and Pike owns half the county. He wanted you." "And I," Eli's voice trailed off shame, darkening his weathered face. Ruby's fists tightened. "So you traded me like cattle." When her father gave no answer, she bolted into the fading light, clutching the papers to her chest as her heart pounded wild. 3 days, that's all she had before the wedding, shackled her forever to a man who treated wives like trophies, tossing them aside when they lost their shine. Folks whispered about Pike's first wife falling down a mine shaft, and the second vanishing back east, never to return. And now the cruelest man in the territory had set his sights on her. She ran until her legs carried her into the livery stable, her old childhood refuge. The smell of hay leather and horse sweat wrapped around her. She pressed her back to the rough boards and finally broke sobs tearing free. "Miss Lane." The deep voice startled her. Ruby jerked upright, scrubbing her tears away. Standing there was Jack Coulter, his blue eyes steady with concern. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair brushing his collar, Jack had drifted into Silver Creek 8 months back. Folks called him a cowboy, a man who kept to himself, shoeing horses and helping on ranches when work needed doing. I didn't think anyone was here," Ruby stammered, embarrassed. Jack set aside the saddle he'd been mending and moved closer, calm, as if approaching a skittish mare. "Are you all right, Miss Lane?" "No," she whispered. "Not at all." His gaze shifted to the crumpled papers in her grip. What happened? Something in his quiet steadiness broke down her defenses. Before she realized it, Ruby spilled everything: her father's gambling, Pike's ultimatum, the forced marriage that felt like a death sentence. "He's a monster," she whispered. "Everyone knows what became of his other wives." Jack listened in silence, jaw tightening. When she finished, he held out his hand. "Let me see those papers." Hesitating, she handed them over. He studied every word, his face hardening. Then slowly, deliberately, he ripped the contract in half. Then quarters. Then into scraps no bigger than confetti. The shredded pieces drifted to the dirt floor. "He can't have you," Jack said simply. "You're no man's property." Ruby's breath caught. "Do you realize what you've done? Pike will come after you, after both of us." Jack stepped closer, his eyes blazing like blue fire with flecks of gold. "Let him come. You're not his. You never will be. If you've nowhere else, I've got a cabin out past the ridge. You'll be safe there until we figure this out. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Jack's tone softened. "I've watched you since I came to town. I saw how you read to the children after church, how you cared for Hannah Boone when she fell last winter. You deserve to marry for love, not because some tyrant buys your father's debts." Ruby's voice trembled. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Jack's expression gentled. "Because some things are worth fighting for." Hope sparked inside her chest for the first time all day. But that flicker died as the stable doors slammed open. Grant Pike strode in, flanked by 2 gunmen. His fine suit and polished boots didn't belong in a place like this, but the gleaming pistol in his hand certainly did. Well, Pike drawled, lips curling in a smile colder than steel. My bride-to-be, looking mighty cozy with the cowboy. His eyes fell to the shredded papers scattered across the floor. And what's this? Jack stepped square between Ruby and Pike, his voice calm but unyielding. The lady doesn't want to marry you, Pike. Find yourself another bride. Pike's laugh was sharp as broken glass. That's not how it works, cowboy. I've got a contract with her father. She's mine. She's not yours, Jack shot back. She's not anyone's to give or take. She's her own woman. Pike sneered. So she chooses you, a drifter with dust on his boots and not 2 coins to rub together? He flicked his wrist toward his men. Take him. Teach him what happens to fools who meddle in my business. Teach him what happens to men who meddle in my affairs. The hired guns lunged, but Jack Coulter was quicker than they counted on. With one swift motion, he snatched up a pitchfork propped by the stall wall and swung it in a wide, vicious arc, forcing both men to stumble back out of reach. Run, Ruby! He barked. For a heartbeat, Ruby Lane froze, torn between staying at his side or fleeing. But when one of Grant Pike's thugs yanked a pistol free, she realized her presence would only drag him down. With one last desperate glance at Jack, she darted past the men and bolted through the stable doors. The cool evening air slapped her face as she ran, heart-hammering. Behind her, the chaos raged, shouts, scuffling boots. Then the crack of a gunshot split the night, making her blood run cold. Jack, she whispered, terror twisting inside her. Before she could turn back, the pounding of hooves roared behind her. Out of the darkness came Jack, astride a black stallion, grim-faced but alive. He reached his arm down to her. Take my hand. Ruby seized it without hesitation. His powerful grip hauled her up in one smooth motion, and she landed behind him on the saddle. Hold on tight, he shouted, as more gunfire cracked in the distance. She clung to him, arms tight around his waist. Her cheek pressed to his back as the horse surged forward, carrying them away from Silver Creek into the night. They rode hard, the stallion eating up the miles, and Ruby felt the steady beat of Jack's heart beneath her palms, strangely steadying in the storm of danger. At last, when the moon hung high, Jack slowed and steered them into a cottonwood grove off the trail. We'll be safe here a while, he said, swinging down and steadying Ruby as her legs shook. Her eyes searched him in the silver light. Are you hurt? He rolled his shoulder, grimacing. Pike's aim isn't half as good as he thinks. Just a graze. Let me see. Ruby's tone left no room for argument. He slipped off his jacket, bearing an angry slash across his arm. That needs cleaning, she murmured, grateful for something practical to do. There's a stream beyond those trees. Supplies are in my saddlebag. While Jack fetched water, Ruby rummaged his bag, pulling out a small kit jerky and a flask. By the time he returned, she had a bandage ready. She soaked a cloth with whiskey. This'll sting. He didn't flinch, though his eyes stayed locked on hers as she worked. You've done this before, he said. My mother was a healer before she passed. I helped her tend the sick, especially that influenza season when I was 16. Their eyes met as she tied the bandage, and Ruby felt how close they were, how different her life had become in mere hours. Thank you, she whispered, for risking everything for me back there. Jack brushed a loose strand of her hair back, his touch light as a feather. I meant what I said, Ruby. Some things are worth fighting for. Her breath caught at the way he spoke her name. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said softly. You're kind. You're brave. And you deserve better than being bartered to a man like Pike. His voice dropped lower. And ever since I saw you placing flowers on Clara Whitlow's grave, I haven't been able to get you out of my mind. Ruby's heart fluttered strangely. Where do we go now? Pike won't let this go. Jack's expression turned grave. I've got a friend with a ranch 2 days' ride across the line. We'll hole up there until we figure the rest. Our next move. Ruby repeated the words, equal parts frightening and exhilarating. Only that morning she'd been a dutiful daughter trapped by her father's mistakes. Now she was running into the unknown with a man she barely knew, but trusted completely. Get some rest, Jack told her, laying his jacket down for her to lie on. We ride at first light. Exhaustion overcame her, and the last thing she saw was Jack against a tree gun across his lap, keeping watch under the moon. At dawn, Ruby awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of him rustling at the fire. You're up early, she said, smoothing the wrinkles from her dress. Old habits, Jack replied, handing her a tin cup. On the trail you rise with the sun. Been on the trail long? She asked, carefully studying the shadow in his eyes. Longer than I'd like, was all he said. They ate jerky and hardtack, then mounted again. As they rode, Ruby studied his profile. You're not just some cowboy, are you? Silence stretched. At last he admitted no. Not always. What were you? He exhaled. Voice nearly lost in the wind. A soldier after the war, then a ranger. Lately, a bounty hunter. Ruby tried to match the man she saw, the one who tore up her marriage papers, with the hardened life he described. Is that why you came to Silver Creek hunting someone? Jack tensed beneath her hands. Yes, but not the way you think. I came for the man who killed my brother. Did you find him? No. The word was flat. The trail went cold here. I took the job in town while I kept looking. After a while, his voice dropped. I started wondering if maybe it was time to stop chasing ghosts. I'm sorry about your brother, Ruby, Lane said softly. Jack Coulter gave a curt nod, but stayed silent, and the two of them rode on with nothing but the steady beat of hooves filling the air. By midday, the sun blazed mercilessly overhead. They finally reined in near a small creek, letting the horse drink, while they took shelter in the meager shade of a mesquite tree. Ruby bent to splash cool water on her face. That's when she spotted a rising cloud of dust far back on the horizon. Jack, she called, urgently pointing. He was at her side in an instant, eyes narrowing, his jaw set. Riders. 3, maybe 4. Has to be Pike's men. He wasted no time grabbing up their scant supplies. We need to ride. They mounted again, pressing the tired horse harder, as the flatlands gave way to broken hills scattered with brush and jagged stone. Jack glanced over his shoulder. There's a canyon up ahead. If we reach it first, we've got a chance to shake them. The earth suddenly split before them into a deep, twisting canyon with sheer walls. Jack urged the stallion inside, the temperature dropping as shadows swallowed them. Stay close, he warned. It's easy to get lost in here. They wound through the maze of rock until Jack led them into a hidden grotto, where a spring bubbled from the wall. He swung down and helped Ruby dismount, steadying her trembling legs. We'll hole up here. With any luck, they'll take a wrong turn. Ruby dropped to the ground, aching from the long ride. And if they don't? What if they find us? Jack checked his revolver before sliding it back into its holster. Then I deal with them. Her voice wavered. I don't want you killing for me. He looked at her serious and raw. Ruby, I've done things I'm not proud of, things that haunt me still. But protecting you isn't one of them. He knelt, taking her hands firmly. I won't let Pike or anyone lay a finger on you. That's a promise. The fire in his eyes stole her breath. Why do you care so much about me? His voice dropped low. Because in a life filled with shadows, you're the first light I've seen in a long, long time. Before she could answer, the canyon echoed with the cry of a horse. Jack was instantly on his feet, revolver drawn. "Stay here," he whispered, slipping around the bend. Ruby's heart thundered as the minutes dragged like hours. Then gunfire cracked through the canyon walls. Unable to bear it, she seized a sharp rock and crept toward the sound, hands shaking. Around the corner she found Jack crouched behind a boulder, trading shots with 2 gunmen. A third already lay lifeless in the dust. One outlaw shouted, his voice bouncing off the stone. "Give it up, Cowboy, hand over the girl, and maybe Pike lets you live. Not happening." Jack called back, answering with a shot that forced the man into cover. Ruby held her breath as the gunfight raged. Then, while Jack paused to reload, one thug charged with a knife raised high. Without thinking, Ruby hurled her rock with all her strength. It struck his shoulder, spoiling his aim. He spun toward her with a snarl, but Jack was on him in a flash, slamming him down and knocking him cold with a brutal blow. The last man, seeing his partner fall, fired wildly and fled deeper into the canyon. Jack was beside Ruby in an instant, gripping her shoulders. "I told you to stay hidden. I couldn't just sit there while you fought alone," she shot back, only then realizing how close they stood. For a moment, the world went still, danger forgotten. Then Jack pulled her into a fierce embrace. "We need to move. That last one will bring more." They rushed to pack their gear. As Ruby tightened the saddle straps, her eyes caught a dark stain spreading across Jack's side. "You're hurt," she gasped. "It's nothing. Just a graze," he muttered. She lifted his shirt before he could protest. The wound was worse than he claimed. A bullet had carved into his ribs. "This isn't nothing. It needs stitching." No time, he argued, though the pallor of his face betrayed his pain. "If we don't patch it now, you won't stay in the saddle," she countered, voice firm. "Give me 5 minutes." Reluctantly, he nodded. Ruby worked swiftly, cleaning the wound with what little they had, then threading a needle from his kit. Her hand stayed steady as she stitched the gash. "You've got a healer's touch," Jack murmured through clenched teeth. "My mother always said courage matters as much as skill. The healer must be brave, so the wounded can trust them." She tied off the stitch. "I do trust you, Ruby," he said quietly. "More than anyone in a long while." Their eyes locked, warmth blooming in her chest. But distant voices echoed through the canyon, breaking the moment. Jack rose with a wince. "Time to go." They mounted again, pushing through the twisting passageways, until at last they emerged into open country. Rolling hills stretched before them. Endless and wild. "We'll head for those hills," Jack Coulter decided, pointing toward the darker ridges against the fading sky. "There's an old trapper's cabin out that way. We can spend the night there." As they rode, Ruby Lane tried to grasp the whiplash of her life. Only yesterday, she had resigned herself to a living death, forced into the arms of a cruel man she despised. Now she was racing across open country with a cowboy who had torn her marriage papers to shreds, declaring she belonged to no man, a man who had taken bullets to guard her freedom. "What's on your mind?" Jack asked, noticing her silence. "Everything," Ruby admitted. "How fast life can turn. Yesterday I thought my future was set in stone, and now you're free to choose your own road," Jack finished gently. "Am I?" she asked in a hushed voice. "Or did I just trade one kind of prison for another?" Jack drew the horse to a stop and turned toward her, his eyes unwavering. "Ruby, once we're safe. If you want to walk away, I won't stand in your way. I didn't rip up those papers to stake a claim. I did it because no man has the right to decide your fate but you." The raw honesty in his voice sank deep into her chest. "I know," she whispered. "That's what makes you different from Pike, from my father, from any man I've ever known." By twilight, they reached the weathered log cabin. It was small, just one room, but the roof held, and the stone hearth promised warmth. While Jack saw to the horse, Ruby swept away years of dust and gathered wood. Soon a fire crackled its glow, chasing the gloom. "We've got enough food for tomorrow," she reported, laying out the meager supplies. But after that, Jack lowered himself onto a bench, his wound making every movement heavy. "My friend's ranch is half a day's ride. We'll be there by afternoon. He owes me his life. He won't turn us away. And with his men around, Pike would be a fool to try anything." Ruby settled beside him, the long day weighing her down. "And after that? What happens?" Jack turned the firelight, burnishing his features. "That depends on what you want." "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I've never been allowed to want anything before." His calloused hand found hers warm in the flicker of the fire. "Then maybe you start there figuring out what Ruby Lane wants, not what someone else demands of you." Her eyes blurred with sudden tears. "I want to stop being afraid. I want to make choices, even bad ones, as long as they're mine. And I want to know why you really tore up those papers." Jack's thumb traced light circles on her skin, sending a shiver up her arm. "Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were different. You deserved more than to be sold like stock at an auction. And because the thought of you in another man's arms, it broke something inside me. You barely knew me," she whispered. "Sometimes you don't need years to know someone matters," he said, pressing his hand to his chest. "Sometimes you just feel it here." Before doubt could creep in, Ruby leaned forward and brushed her lips to his. Jack froze for a beat, then kissed her back with a tenderness that spoke of longing long held silent. When they finally parted, Ruby rested her forehead against his. "I've never done that before," she confessed. Jack smiled, the hardness of his face easing. "Then I'm honored to be the first." They lingered by the fire, trading pieces of their lives. Jack spoke of Missouri farmland, of fighting beside his brother Owen Coulter in the war, and of the day Owen was cut down by a man they trusted. That loss had driven him to bounty hunting. His name was Cole Hart, Jack said, voice low. Ruby's eyes widened. "The same Cole Hart who bought the Silver Creek Bank. He came to town a few months back, said he was from back east." Jack's face hardened. Tall reddish hair beard, slight limp. "Yes," she said, realization dawning. "It's him," Jack confirmed, his voice tight. "He's been right under my nose all this time." Ruby laid a hand on his arm. "What will you do?" Jack's jaw clenched. "Once you're safe, I'll deal with him. Not the way I once planned with a bullet, but with the law." "What changed your mind?" Ruby asked softly, though she already sensed the answer. Jack's eyes met hers, lit by dying firelight. "I found something I want more than revenge. A chance at a different kind of life." Her chest swelled with warmth that had nothing to do with the blaze. They talked until exhaustion pulled them under, falling asleep together on the narrow cot, her head tucked against his shoulder. Morning light spilled through the single window. Ruby woke to find Jack already on his feet, gun in hand, eyes on the door. "What is it?" she asked quickly. "Probably nothing," he murmured, though tension stiffened his frame. "Thought I heard something. Stay put. I'll check outside." Before she could protest, he slipped out into the dawn. Ruby Lane yanked on her boots and hurried to the window, scanning the tree line for any sign of trouble. Moments later, Jack Coulter strode out of the pines, his face grim. "Riders coming. At least 6 of them." Her stomach dropped. "Grant Pike," she whispered. "Most likely. We've got to move now." They grabbed their few belongings and mounted, leaving the cabin's thin safety behind. Jack spurred the stallion westward toward a line of low hills. "My friend's ranch is just beyond. If we can make it, we'll be safe." But their pursuers rode fresh horses, gaining fast. Ruby could already hear the pounding of hooves closing the gap. "They're too close!" she cried. Jack veered toward a jagged outcropping. "We'll hold them off here." He hauled her down, guiding her behind a wall of boulders. "Stay low," he ordered, drawing his Colt. "No matter what happens, don't show yourself until I say. I can't just hide while you— Please, Ruby." His eyes locked with hers, fierce and pleading. "I can't fight if I'm thinking about you." Reluctantly, she crouched behind the rocks. The first rifle shot rang out, echoing across the hills. Jack's revolver answered the sharp crack, cutting the morning stillness. Ruby huddled down, covering her ears as the fight raged. Through a gap in the stone, she glimpsed 5 riders fanning out to surround him. One toppled when Jack's bullet struck true, but the rest pressed harder, lead hissing through the air. Then she heard a sharp grunt of pain. Her blood froze. Jack sagged against the rock, blood spreading across his shirt, his left arm hanging useless. Still, he fired again, dropping another outlaw. But Ruby knew he couldn't last. She spotted a pistol Jack had left near her. Snatching it up with trembling hands, she rose from cover. "Stop!" she shouted, aiming at the nearest rider. "The next man who fires dies." Her sudden stand stunned them. In that breath of hesitation, thunder rolled across the ridge. A dozen mounted men swept over the hilltop. "Drop your weapons," barked the lead rider, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest. "U.S. Marshal, lay him down now." Outnumbered Pike's gunmen slowly lowered their rifles. Ruby dropped beside Jack, panic tightening her throat at the sight of blood soaking his side. "I told you to stay hidden," he muttered, though a faint smile tugged his lips. "And I told you I'm done letting others make my choices," she shot back, pressing her kerchief against his wound. The marshal swung down, weathered face full of concern. "Jack Coulter, seems I can't leave you 2 minutes without you catching lead." Jack's voice was weak but steady. "Marshal Seth Carver, your timing could be better." "Looks perfect from here," Carver replied dryly, then tipped his hat to Ruby. "Ma'am, I'm U.S. Marshal Seth Carver. This stubborn fool's an old friend of mine. Ruby Lane," she answered quickly, not taking her eyes from Jack. "He needs a doctor." "My ranch is just over that rise," Carver assured her. "We've got a good one there. My men will handle Pike's trash." He gestured toward the captured outlaws. "Now maybe one of you can tell me what in blazes is going on." As Jack was lifted into a wagon, Ruby poured out the story: her forced marriage, Jack's defiance, their flight from Silver Creek, and the revelation about Cole Hart's true identity. Cole Hart Carver's face hardened. "We've hunted him for years: bank jobs, fraud, murder, clear across 3 territories. He killed my brother Owen." "Coulter," Jack rasped from the wagon. "Then he's as good as caught," Carver said firmly. "I'll send men to Silver Creek. He won't slip the noose this time." Ruby's voice quivered, and Pike Carver's jaw tightened. "Grant Pike's already wanted in Colorado for murdering his second wife. Once we lay hands on him, he'll hang." Relief swept through Ruby like cool rain after drought. "So it's over. We're safe." "Yes," Miss Lane Carver promised. "You're safe now." The ride to Carver's spread blurred in Ruby's memory, her gaze fixed only on Jack's pale face, his shallow breaths. By the time they reached the ranch house, he was barely conscious. Inside the ranch, a grizzled army surgeon named Dr. Roy Coulter quickly took charge. Jack was carried into a bedroom. "The bullet's still lodged," Coulter told Ruby after his exam. "If I don't get it out now, infection will set in." "Will he survive?" she whispered, clutching Jack's limp hand. The doctor's eyes softened. "He's tough, and the bullet missed anything vital. With care, he'll pull through." Ruby refused to leave. She steadied instruments, wiped Jack's brow, and held him still as the doctor worked. At last, Coulter pulled the bullet free, cleaned the wound, and bound it tight. "You've got a steady hand, Miss Lane," the doctor remarked. "Ever thought of nursing?" Ruby brushed Jack's damp hair back from his brow. "My mother, Clara Whitlow, was a healer. She taught me what she knew." She taught me what she knew. Well, your young man is lucky to have you, Dr. Roy Coulter remarked before leaving them alone. Ruby Lane flushed at the words your young man, but didn't correct him. Instead, she sank into a chair at the bedside, determined to keep watch as long as it took. The hours dragged on. Outside, the sun inched across the sky, shadows stretching long and thin as day gave way to evening. Marshal Seth Carver stopped in briefly, telling her a wire had been sent to Silver Creek. Deputies were already on their way to take Cole Hart into custody. "What about my father?" Ruby asked softly. Carver's rugged face gentled. "Eli Lane made a mistake, Miss Lane. But forcing you into marriage isn't a crime. Now, if he knowingly aided Pike, a wanted man, that'd be different." "He didn't know," Ruby said firmly. "My father's weak, foolish even, but not wicked. He never would have sent me to Grant Pike if he'd known about the wives." "Then he's got nothing to fear from the law," Carver assured her. "Though he might have plenty to fear from you when you go back." "If I go back," Ruby murmured, her gaze drifting to Jack Coulter, lying pale and still. Carver followed her eyes, a knowing smile tugging his mouth. "I've known Jack Coulter 15 years, rode beside him in the war-hunted outlaws after. In all that time, I've never seen him risk everything for anyone the way he just did for you. That kind of devotion doesn't come around often." When Carver left, Ruby turned his words over in her mind, her heart heavy with feelings she was just beginning to understand. Twilight bled into night. She dozed in her chair, but never left Jack's side. Near midnight, he stirred, eyes fluttering open. "You're still here," he whispered, voice rough with pain. "Where else would I be?" she said, catching his hand. "Anywhere. You're free now, Ruby. Pike can't touch you anymore." "I know." Her voice was tender. "But freedom means I get to choose, and right now I choose to be here with you." His fingers squeezed hers weakly. "You deserve more than a broken-down bounty hunter with nothing but scars and a bad name." "That's not who you are," Ruby countered fiercely. "You're the man who tore up my marriage papers, the man who bled to keep me free. And I choose you, Jack Coulter, if you'll have me." Despite the pain, he lifted a trembling hand, brushing her cheek. "I've wanted you since the first time I laid eyes on you. I never thought I could hope for this." Words failed him, so he pulled her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that said more than any vow. When they finally parted, Ruby rested her forehead against his. "Rest," she whispered. "We have time, all the time in the world." Over the next 2 weeks, Jack's strength slowly returned. Ruby never left him, reading aloud, changing his bandages, learning every piece of the man behind the scars. Word came from Silver Creek Cole Hart had been arrested, found cowering inside the bank vault. Grant Pike, though, had slipped away into the far territories now with a price on his head. "He'll get sloppy," Carver told them grimly. "Men like Pike always do." A letter arrived soon after, carried by one of Carver's men. In shaky script, Eli Lane poured out apologies, begging Ruby's forgiveness. "He thought he was protecting you in his own twisted way," Jack said, as Ruby read aloud. "I know," she sighed. "But protection without respect isn't love, it's control." "What'll you tell him?" Jack asked. "That I forgive him?" she said slowly. "But I won't live under his roof again." "Where will you go?" His tone was calm, but his eyes gave him away. Ruby folded the letter and set it aside, then took his hand. "That depends on you, Jack Coulter, on what future you want." He eased her closer until she sat on the edge of his bed, his thumb brushing circles across her palm. "I've been thinking about that. Marshal Carver offered me a badge. Said with heart behind bars, it's time I quit drifting and plant roots." Ruby's heart quickened. "Is that what you want?" "Part of it," Jack admitted. "It means steady work, a small house near town. But a house ain't a home without someone to share it with." Understanding dawned, her breath catching. Are you asking me, Jack Coulter? His grin softened the hard lines of his face. I'm asking if you'd think about building a life with me, Ruby Lane. Not because you're forced to, but because you choose it. Joy bubbled up inside her. Is this a proper proposal, sir? Not yet, he chuckled. When I do it right, I'll be on one knee, not flat on my back in a sickbed. But know this, my heart's yours through and through. Ruby kissed him, then full of promise. Then I'll wait for that proposal. But until then, yes. I'd love nothing more than to make a life with you. By the time autumn brushed the hills with gold and crimson, Jack was strong again and wearing a deputy's star under Marshal Seth Carver's command. True to his word, he bought a small home on the edge of Willow Springs, the nearest town to the Carver Ranch. The house was modest, but strong, broad porch, sturdy beams, enough ground for a garden, and a few horses. One crisp October evening, Jack Coulter saddled up and took Ruby Lane to a bluff above the valley, the sinking sun painting the world in fire and shadow. There, with the vast western sky stretching forever overhead, he dropped to one knee and held out a plain gold ring that had once belonged to his mother. Ruby Lane, he said, steady, though his eyes carried a nervous spark. From the moment I tore up those marriage papers, I knew my heart was yours. Will you marry me not because you have to, but because you choose to? Tears blurred Ruby's sight as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. 2 weeks later, they wed in the little church at Willow Springs. Marshal Seth Carver stood at Jack's side as best man, and Nora Carver served as Ruby's matron of honor. Eli, Lane did not attend. His reply had been a short note, explaining he'd sold what remained of the family place in Silver Creek and gone west to California for a new start. He enclosed a bank draft as well. He said it was my mother's inheritance, that it belongs to me, Ruby told Jack the night before their vows. Jack let out a low whistle at the sum. That's enough to start a ranch of our own if that's the road you want. What I want, Ruby said, curling against him on the porch swing, is a future we build together, whatever shape it takes. By spring, word came down the line Cole Hart had been tried and convicted for killing Owen Coulter, along with a string of other crimes. He would hang before month's end, finally closing the long hunt that had driven Jack for years. Do you feel different? Ruby asked when Jack returned from witnessing the hanging. He thought for a long moment, the sunset warm on their porch. I figured I would. Spent so many years chasing justice, I wasn't sure who I'd be without it. He took her hand, thumb brushing her wedding band. Turns out I'm still Jack Coulter, your husband. And that's enough. More than enough, Ruby whispered, leaning against him. Jack pulled a folded scrap from his pocket, worn thin from years of handling. What's that? She asked. The marriage contract, he said, lifting it in the fading light, the one I tore up that day in the stable. I kept the pieces. Ruby stared at him. Why to remind myself that some chains are worth breaking, that the promises of tyrants mean nothing compared to the vows we choose, and because that day was when my life truly began. He struck a match, touched it to the paper. The flames devoured it quickly. When nothing remained but ash, he scattered it into the breeze. There, he said softly. Now the only promises between us are the ones we made ourselves. Ruby kissed him, then her heart full to bursting. He had given her the greatest gift of all, freedom to choose, and the joy of choosing him. As twilight deepened, Jack drew her close and whispered against her hair, "You're mine forever, Ruby Coulter. Not because of any paper, but because we both want it that way." Forever, she breathed, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years turned like pages in their story. Their little house expanded as their family grew. First, a son, Luke Coulter, named for Jack's brother and Ruby's father, Then, 2 years later, a daughter, Maggie Coulter, with curls like spun gold and a will to match her mother's. With Ruby's inheritance and Jack's pay as deputy, they bought a spread of their own, a ranch they christened Freedom's Claim. Horses roamed the pastures, children's laughter rang off the hills, and the home they built was filled with warmth. Grant Pike never darkened their door again. Rumor said he'd been gunned down in some border town saloon, ending, as he had lived alone, reckless, unredeemed. From California came letters from Eli Lane, written in a shaky hand. His words spoke of regret, of hard lessons learned too late. At last, when Luke was 5, Eli made the trip east. He brought a wooden horse he had carved for his grandson and a porcelain doll for Maggie. The reunion was awkward at first, but healing came in small ways, Eli teaching Luke to whittle Ruby, showing him her garden. Jack and Eli speaking quietly on the porch at dusk. On his last evening, Eli said, "Thank you, Jack, for giving my daughter what I couldn't. The freedom to find her own happiness." Jack only nodded. She found it herself. I just tore up the paper that stood in her way. As the children grew, so did the legend. The tale of the torn marriage papers and the cowboy who claimed she's mine forever became family lore, retold by lamplight until it sounded like myth. "Tell us again, Papa," little Maggie would beg. "Tell us how you saved Mama." And Jack would gather his children close, catching Ruby's smile, and begin. Once upon a time, there was a brave, beautiful woman. On their 20th anniversary, Jack surprised Ruby with a locket. Inside was a tiny scrap of that old contract sealed between glass. "To remember where we started," he said, "and how far we've come." Ruby touched the yellowed fragment, marveling how something that once symbolized her chains had become a token of her freedom. "I never dreamed that tearing those papers would lead to all this." "I did," Jack replied simply, drawing her into his arms. "The moment I saw you crying over those papers, I knew you were meant to live free," Jack Coulter said quietly. "And I prayed with all I had that you might choose to share that freedom with me." "Best choice I ever made," Ruby Lane murmured against his chest. As twilight settled over their spread, they stood side by side on the porch of the home they had built together, watching their children race through the yard. Luke Coulter, now tall and lean, with his father's steady strength, chased after Maggie, whose golden curls bounced as she ran, already carrying her mother's fire and determination. Their laughter rolled across the land like music carried on the evening breeze. "We did well, didn't we?" Jack asked softly, his arms snug around Ruby's waist. "We surely did," she agreed, leaning into him. "Though sometimes I still can't believe it all started with forced marriage papers and a hard-headed cowboy who refused to let me be traded away." Jack pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'd tear up 1,000 contracts for you, Ruby Coulter. And I'd choose you 1,000 times over," she whispered back, turning in his arms and sealing her words with a kiss. As the stars blinked awake across the wide western sky, they lingered on that porch, wrapped in each other's arms, not as possession and possession holder, but as partners, not bound by control, but by choice, not by a union forced upon them, but by a love freely chosen day after day, year after year. And in the great tapestry of the American West, among the ballads of gunfighters, outlaws, and gold-hungry dreamers, perhaps no tale endured longer than that of the cowboy who tore apart a marriage contract meant to enslave a woman, and the woman brave enough to stand tall and choose him in return. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West, stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.